This is episode 86 of Art Talk, and today I have a very special guest, Jessica Agudelo. Do I pronounce that right?
Yes, Agudelo, that's fine.
Jessica is a psychologist specialized in mental health. She has a wealth of experience and is an exceptional trainer. And I know, because we met at a training at UK Black Pride, and after that I have been in one of her workshops. And she is a great listener. She currently has a program, Building the Power of Us, which we also will discuss in our conversation. Welcome, Jessica. Really happy to have you in Art Talk.
Thank you, Karen. It's so good to see you. Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So, mental health. It seems to be at the front center of everyone's attention these days. But there is a huge distinction between your mental health when you walk against a wall or something because of stress and mental illness, right? Could you briefly explain what the difference is and why it is important to be aware of that?
So mental health, we all have it. And I think we need to start from that specific point. We all have mental health, just like we have physical health. Okay. Traditionally, we've viewed the terminology around mental health has been riddled and, with stigma, very negative stigma. So people don't talk about it, or people go, oh, mental health, no, it's for somebody else. It's people over there. But actually, mental health, we all have it, just like we have physical health. And so when we're mentally well, when we feel good about ourselves, when our well-being is good, okay, and well-being is all about how we feel about ourselves, how comfortable we are with what we're doing, with our relationships, with our sense of purpose. When we're in a good space, that's when we have mental health. And life will throw things at us, different experiences, life events, and even trauma. And so if we have positive mental health, we are going to have more skills, more coping strategies, and more supports that we can enlist to help us manage and deal with those everyday life stresses or situations or trauma that may come our way. Now, if we look at mental health as a spectrum or a continuum, our mental health is very fluid. So we can move along that continuum or that line into experiencing poor mental health. And that's when things will happen, situations, relationship breakdown, for example, or maybe I've lost my job, or maybe I'm struggling with my finances, or maybe I've got a physical health condition that is impacting my quality of life. So that's going to start to have a negative impact on my mental health. And I can say that I'm experiencing poor mental health. And poor mental health comes with a range of symptoms that can be unpleasant. Symptoms like, lack of sleep, or perhaps constant preoccupation about, all those things we are anxious about. It can affect us physically as well. So we begin to experience symptoms like regular migraines, for example, or, an upset tummy. And we just don't know where that's coming from. So there's lots of different symptoms that we may experience when we have poor mental health. And at this point, I'm not talking about mental illness. No. All of us will experience poor mental health. I guarantee it, okay? And so those symptoms are not necessarily long-lasting and probably not as severe to have such a negative impact on our day-to-day. We can still function, we can still go to work, we can still pick up the kids from school, we can still do all the things that we need to do, but we don't feel well, okay? And so if we then move along that continuum, what we then have is, for people that are experiencing poor mental health for prolonged periods of time, they're not resting, they're not being supported, they're not accessing the right supports. What we're doing here is we're increasing the risk of developing mental ill health. Now, some people develop mental ill health, what feels like quite suddenly and quite quickly, and there might be something to do with their biochemistry, with their neurotransmitters in the brain, perhaps not working for them or maybe there's a genetic predisposition, or maybe there are other things that they may have encountered in their lifetime, like trauma, that will exacerbate or increase that risk for them. And so with mental illness, what we have is people is starting to experience symptoms that affect you emotionally, physically, and in terms of your behavior. They're more severe, they're more long lasting, and they begin to interfere significantly with your day-to-day functioning and your relationships and your work. It starts to make life very difficult. Okay.
Yeah.
So those, I would say, is when you look at that spectrum, you need to be very clear that there are a range of experiences through that spectrum, and we all move along that. Some of us may never experience mental ill health, but definitely poor mental health. But we are all at risk in some way. And similarly, we can all do things to promote good mental health so it can prevent us from, hopefully, from moving along that continuum.
Yeah. Wow, that is very clear. And I love the way you say we all experience this in in spectra, but also how this can evolve when you don't get the right help, when you don't get do not take care of yourself the right way. Yeah, very clear. Thank you. And another term I wanted to ask you, what I frequently hear is neurodivergent. That is, it's almost like a trend or something, because I hear it everywhere. And I see that a lot of artists say they are, but it gets mixed up somehow. Is this also a form of mental health, or is this something else? Because I always see as if it is, well, you said before, mental health often get mixed up in a lot of things. This too.
Yeah, so there are two different things. Those are two very different things, but there's a very strong overlap. So, I've explained what mental illness is, and neurodiversity has to do with brain function and behavioral traits. Okay, so those who are neurodivergent experience and interact with the world very differently or in different ways. There is no right or wrong way, by the way. But certainly, when we look at systems and organizational systems, institutions, education, they have been developed or they have evolved to follow one particular way, probably the majority. So what we have is a population of neurodivergent, people who are a minority. Okay, and for many, many years, centuries, probably, there's been no understanding and no awareness about neurodiversity at all. So what we then have is a lot of people with particular behavioral traits or ways in which they see the world and engage with the world differently, who have really struggled to navigate through these structures and the world as it is. And so when we think about mental health, and if you're constantly coming, across lots of struggles, discrimination, difficulties, that's going to increase your risk of developing mental ill health. So what we do know is that a lot of people who are neurodivergent are also at higher risk of developing mental ill health, not because, there's something particular about a person who's neurodiverse and mental illness. It's more around the experiences in the world that is so difficult for a lot of people, will increase levels of stress. And what does stress do? Is stress increases your risk of developing mental ill health. So it's not a trend, I would say. I think that there's more awareness. People are talking about it, talking about their own lived experiences. More parents being aware and asking questions, especially within the education system, considering whether, and requesting their children to go through an assessment for neurodiversity more and more now, because they want some answers, because they want to know how they can support their children, for example. And I've come across so many adults who are now going for assessments, as their choice. It's their choice to go through those assessments because they've always felt that there's been something very different about them that doesn't quite perhaps connect with the way that the world is structured at the moment. So again, neurodiversity, two different things, but there's an overlap around vulnerability and risk and discrimination and the impact that inequalities and discrimination will have on people that can risk to develop poor mental health or mental illness.
Yeah. I understand that. I also understand that some of them are really highly sensitive, and they express themselves through art, which is, I think, a very good thing. And art and mental health could be supportive of each other. I see many people also taking up creativity to release stress that affects their mental health. On the other side, I see professional artists who make a living or want to make a living from their art often experience this differently. They get burnout, depression. I see people in communities, they say, I'm going to give up. I'm going to give up because I'm going to hang my palette in the willow somewhere because this is not working. What would you advise artists who experience this type of stress that affects, in the end, their mental health? So instead of healing themselves with what they love to do and also being able to give that to other people, it's the opposite.
Yes, and I think I'm coming across, I'm having so many different conversations with people across so many different sectors and lifestyles around burnout. And again, it's so important that we consider that definition of burnout and what it actually means, because we're in danger of, again, using terminology incorrectly and perhaps not appreciating burnout from what it is. So when we talk about burnout, we're talking about high expectations versus no control. So we see this a lot in workplaces where you have huge demands on individuals, on teams to deliver, for outcomes, to be very efficient, to constantly be focusing, and they don't have any control over their role or their what they bring, or creativity, or they're not autonomous in that space. So that's when you get burnout. You lose this sense of hope and in what you do. Nothing's going to change what I'm doing at the moment. So in the kind of, when we look at artists, we can also see that a lot of the time artists are working on their own. And a lot of their expectations are personal expectations around that, what they need to be doing and achieving, from financial expectations to raising their profiles, being seen by the community, etc. And so ultimately, if these things are perhaps not happening at whatever pace an artist is setting or is expecting, then they're going to feel less and less in control. Okay. We're also thinking about navigating through a world of funding, artists having to submit proposals and bids, and working an opportunity that will create opportunities for them, and this is getting a lot more difficult. Okay. And so that loss of control can certainly lead to somebody feeling symptoms of depression, experiencing that hopelessness, really, that sucks your motivation out, essentially, from doing anything, your inspiration and your creativity. And as an artist, if you're not creative, then what do you have? What do I have left if I don't have that creativity anymore? So that's that we need to consider that. And so with what can we do? What can artists do? I think self-awareness is really important, because a lot of the times we go through life on automatic pilot, and we're not recognizing those warning signs, those signs and symptoms that are telling us, really are sending us a message. Our body has a beautiful way of communicating with us, but we don't listen. And so why am I having regular headaches, for example. Why am I feeling so tired? Why is my appetite changing so much? What am I doing daily to look after myself? So that comes with an element of self-awareness, and you really need to engage in that reflective practice to recognize how our body is communicating with us, how our body is changing, and recognizing, okay, what's happening around me, around stress, around relationships, money, what is happening that's currently, either feels difficult, feels out of control. And I think that's the first step. Unless we really kind of reflect on that, we're not going to be able to take that next step. Other things we need to think about as artists is, get together with others, really connect. I think, with technology is wonderful, and we wouldn't be able to meet, you and I, in this space if it wasn't for technology. But at the same time, what we're doing is we're not engaging in those kind of first face-to-face personal spaces where we're talking, where we're having conversations, where we're meeting new people. And that sense of connectedness can really help.
Yep.
I
so agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something. That is something that the VAA, I'm part of a member of the VAA, the Visual Artists Association, and they really create network sessions live. And so I'm setting them up here in the Netherlands. I have one in April, because we are all rowing in our own boat in a way. And you have to meet. I saw here in the Netherlands, which I really love, what you just said, we shouldn't meet or couldn't meet if we didn't have the technique, but experiencing each other, to look each other in the eyes, face to face, to have a cup of tea, to have a chat in real life is so. And so here you have an organization who is organizing offline events. They do pop-ups. You don't bring your phone, not allowed. People read a book, people are knitting, people are playing a game, they have conversations with a stranger, someone plays the piano if there is one or whatever. So you engage. Yeah. And that is important. And I think, maybe you agree, maybe not. I think technology makes us more distant from each other.
Well, is this idea that as we are evolving as a society, as individuals, with more technology, we have access to more resources, we have access to more information, and all those things are good. They're good. But what they're also doing is creating this sense of individualism. Yeah. That I don't need anybody else. I can do it on my own. And that's not necessarily very helpful. No. I think we need to recognize that we need other people. We need to have conversations. We need to share spaces. We need to, if we're in a crisis, we need to be able to have a few people around us that can support us, that can provide a safe space for us to cry, for us to share our concerns, but that can also provide that space for us to have a good laugh and find inspiration in. So it's so important that we recognize, for those of us that are working predominantly alone a lot of the time, that we are finding or looking for those spaces where we can really connect with people. That's so important. So I think that's really being able to recognize that. When am I starting, if I'm starting to experience that struggle, that sense that, I don't know, that's uncomfortable, and I need to reach out for some support. I need to see people, I need to have conversations. And I remember last time we met, we had a wonderful, few hours coffee in the South Bank in London. And again, we talked about all things life, love, work, all of those things over a coffee. And it's recognizing that we need that time with us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thank you for acknowledging that.
Mm.
And I think that, yeah, I think also that what the VAA then does, because they say specifically, artists need to meet each other. They need to support each other. So they organize that and they spreading out like a oil over the whole world. And I think that's a very good thing.
What-
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been reflecting a lot is that I don't have to do stuff on my own.
Mm.
And so, yes, you might have your particular interest and your work that you do as an individual, but you can always co-create projects and programs with others. You know, that doesn't have to take over everything you do, but it's finding those spaces where you can co-create. And that's wonderful if you have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and create the opportunities.
Mm.
Because I think as a human species, we are based on stories and co-creating. We are not individualists in that sense. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely right. I was reading a book, Your Brain on Art, How Art Transforms Us. And it writes also about the power of art for our brains and mental well-being. And it says that it restores mental health. And I would say slowing down time, learn to observe, to widen your perception, more silence, makes you listen and find your purpose. What are your thoughts about art as a healing practice? Maybe in school curriculums, because they're taken out many times, and maybe even in training of psychologists. How important do you think that could be or is?
Hugely important, and art has been used therapeutically to support people with mental ill health. I've certainly came across a lot of art therapists working in prisons in the criminal justice system, and amazing work, amazing opportunity to create a safe space for people to not only to be creative, but it's around self-expression. It's around really being able to connect with identity, with their sense of belonging, you know, through art form, and start conversations about experiences, about trauma, about all sorts of things that are important to you. So art has been used therapeutically, and it still is, and I think it's for us to support it and help, you know, raise awareness of the benefits of art for mental well-being. And as you said, the more we engage with our creative mind, the more, you know, when we think about well-being, it's having those happiness moments or losing yourself in that space of creativity. So, you know, for an hour or so, you can just give yourself a break from maybe all of the things that are going on in your life that may feel out of control. Or if you're using art therapy in a group setting, that you have the opportunity to talk to others about what you've just created. What does that mean to you? Where did it come from? What are your feelings? So we can also learn language of expression. So, you know, through art, we're expressing, you know, a lot of emotional, you know, meaning that we're placing things. And so absolutely important that we do that. And I have come across a lot of educational institutions where they are very proactive in using art, as well as drama therapy, for example. The different types of art, you know, therapeutically to support individuals with their emotional well-being.
Yeah, to me, it's also we had a brief conversation about that before we talked. Expressing yourself, creativity goes further than just thinking, analyzing things with your left hemisphere. You tap into something that goes deeper. It's almost a spiritual experience. when you do your work, because I always find you, the way you listen and the way you are able to connect with people has a very spiritual way of that connection. Is that something that is important for you, that spiritual depth in art? What you say, yeah, it's connecting, but I know from art that you go there, you lose the track of time, you lose something and you find something back. How is that for you as psychologist working with people? How is there the spirituality, the depth in? How do you connect?
Yeah, it's sort of like the only way I can describe it, because it's difficult to describe the experience, right? The only way I can describe it is when you're in flow. So when you are engaging in an activity, in a space where, and as you said, you lose track of time, where things just come to you quite naturally, when you feel the most productive, when you feel this comforting, you're comforted by something much, much bigger than you. I think that's the only way I can describe, that connection with spirituality, with heart, with soul, with body. And most of us, and I think in the Western world, we have been conditioned to be in our heads all the time.
Yep.
Thinking, analyzing, breaking things down, and there's nothing wrong with using our mind, our heads, to do that. I think the important thing is for us to create that balance between, allowing space for us to feel the body, to sense what the body is telling us as well, and then to move into heart and soul and connect more with that kind of spiritual realm, essentially. And yes, and I think a lot of people still struggle with that and often associate spirituality with religion. And they are two different things, but there's lots of overlap because a lot of people who are religious do, mention or talk about those experiences of being in that flow of spirituality where they are connecting with a higher, energy. So, there's a lot of overlap there, but it's definitely a strong part of the work that I'm doing now. But I've also been on a journey because from a very young age, I closed the door to spirituality. I got into my head a lot, and I was being, very analytical and very structured about how I did things and how I walked, and experienced life. And as I've learned and developed and grown as a person, as a woman, then I've allowed, those doors into spirituality to open more and can feel, the greatness of it. And how it's not about knowing everything, but it's more about being comfortable with the unknown. And when you're creating, I would imagine that there's a lot of unknowns. You don't know what you're going to do next. You don't know where that brush or that pen is going to take you next. It just happens, isn't it? And so there's a lot of unknowns, and it's how can we become more comfortable with that.
I love that. Become comfortable with the unknown.
With the unknown, yeah, because we want to know everything.
Yeah.
And like me, reading lots, I need to understand why do people behave in this way, and the study of psychology of human behavior very much about why this happens, and you're trying to get to a theory and to be able to predict. And that's wonderful that we have so much knowledge and that we're continuing to be inquisitive and curious. Love that. But there is also something else that's kind of flowing within all of that, and that we can't fully explain, that isn't necessarily tangible. And it comes through, in the artistic life or world, it happens a lot. My partner is a musician. And he didn't train classically. He doesn't read music, for example. He just plays. and he has a fantastic ear for sound, and he can play, and there's no explanation for that. He can just do it, and he's very talented and he's very good at it, and so there is something kind of beyond. And he's never questioned it. Oh, I just can, and I love doing it, and when I'm doing it, I'm in the flow, and that's that spirituality for you.
Yeah. Well, I have that. I had this as a musician. I'm classically trained, so I can read music.
Yeah.
But what I always found, and which is kind of what your husband experiences, is, yeah, I need to do the reading because I play from someone who has composed. But when after I know, I can let go.
Right,
and
fantastic.
Then something really starts to happen.
Yeah.
Because then you can get behind it and you start to tell a story that's completely different. You're not eating notes, I always say. You are making music. And with painting, it's the same. First, you need to know, and then you can let go. And then you really touch upon what is that spiritual realm or the other realm. I get insights that I think, I look back at the painting, did I do that? I mean, that must be something you have when you have a conversation with people and you help them through stuff, and then you see a transformation. You think, wow, what happened here? I can imagine that.
Absolutely. And it happens a lot, and it happens to a lot of people out there, and a lot of people are almost embarrassed to talk about it for fear of being kind of, perceived differently, or so they're not necessarily talking about it. But those moments of flow of spirituality happen a lot of the time, and you see it with musicians, with writers, with artists in general. They do have this real wonderful almost bridge between the body, the personal, and also moving into the systemic and the spiritual, because of how much time you spend creating, and creating those spaces as well where that creativity can flow.
Yeah, it is as if you open a door and then you get insights. Because
if you think about the anyone that perhaps isn't in or doesn't have, we're all creative, we all have that capacity, but we make choices. And if you think about those of us that have perhaps chosen a different career pathway, you're kind of doing the same thing every day. You're going to work, you're busy checking emails, responding to emails, and writing a report, doing all those things that we're not creating. And then we come home and we need to deal with family and go and walk the dog and all of these things, that we're not creating those spaces for creativity. And so, of course, it will take people in that space, a lot longer perhaps to get to a space of spirituality, unless they deliberately, block time out, to engage with those spaces. But as artists, if you're doing this on a regular basis, you are creating that opportunity and that practice.
And on the other hand, that creativity in everyone, I believe that. I mean, I believe that you as a psychologist are very creative in how you approach people. And I know that because I know you. But I also know from people who are not artists, you don't have to be an artist, but they use their creativity for what they do.
Yes.
It makes them go into flow because they're very good at that. It's something I hate, for instance. But when they are in spreadsheets, they lose track of time.
Yes, of course.
So
and we see
that is still the case. Yeah.
No, it's amazing. I think we can be creative in all sorts of environments and doing different things. I do think that sometimes we go into automatic pilot a lot
Mm-hmm.
when we then become inflexible with our
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
and or when we are perhaps doing jobs that we're not particularly passionate about.
Mm.
And so that's where creativity can diminish.
Yeah. Yeah. And cause mental health problems.
Yes, because we're losing that sense of purpose and
Yeah.
meaning in
Yeah.
what we're doing.
Yeah. You have a course, Building the Power of Us. I love that, the title. And this is tailored toward diversity, inclusion, and well-being. Could you share with us what it entails, what type of organizations you work with or would like to work with, and if there are any cultural organizations you would like to work with, or maybe work with that?
Yeah. Of course. So Building the Power of Us was born during the pandemic, actually. So I'll begin with the story of how it all came about. So during the pandemic, a friend of mine was working for a primary school, and she decided to set up a Zoom, like an exercise class on Zoom every day from 6 to 6:30, only half an hour, to just give her colleagues in that primary school an opportunity to just do some physical activity, because they were all working from home and dealing with a lot of, it was a stressful time,
Yeah.
both work at work and also personal. So she invited me to this group and we started doing exercise together. But I wasn't part of that group. They all knew each other through this primary school that they were working. And as a what we tended, we used to do exercise for half an hour, and then we would just stay and have a little chat afterwards. And I started to get to know them, and then those conversations then evolved into women sharing that they were struggling with different things. Okay. And so, as a thank you to the group, I offered them a session on well-being. So we agreed to meet for 2.5 hours so I can provide them with a workshop around well-being. That day, the 2.5 hours became about 4 hours, because what came out was there was a lot of opening or vulnerability, there was a lot of tears, there was a lot of sharing experiences, both, personal, family, work, so all sorts of things. And so what we agreed was, okay, why don't we meet next week? And again, this was completely separate to the exercise class, so I
Mm-hmm.
didn't want to interrupt that. But then I said, why don't we next week for an hour and a half, and we'll talk about a particular theme that you feel is really important to you. And so we did. And then that second session became a third session, a fourth session. And every week the theme will come up and I will work on that. We'll do a bit of research. And then I will deliver and facilitate conversations and learning around that particular theme. And it was all around well-being. But what came up was, developing people's that power of insight and self-awareness. How do we connect with purpose? How do we connect with compassion? How do we gain clarity? How do we connect with that sense of identity and belonging that comes from our heritage, our culture, our ancestry? And how do we use, the power of vulnerability to lead our lives, lead a family, lead a community, a team? So that then became the power of us. So I started then writing this program, and it evolved to really address some of the emotional support that's required by individuals, by groups of people, communities, or even organizations when they're going through transition and change. And so I've been working for the last 3 or 4 years now with the power of us and adapting the power of us to different communities. Mm-hmm. So I, invited predominantly women and women of color who would engage in these spaces. So we run a number of cohorts. for the first year or two. And then I started offering the Power of Us to organizations. So it was delivered to the South Asian Gallery Collective at the Manchester Museum. Then we had a commission through an organization called Nesta that works, it's a national organization in England that works around supporting communities to connect more and to look at sort of almost different frameworks, project management frameworks to help bring kind of community cohesion, but also improving health in community settings. So we developed the Power of Us there for a lot of the for the diversity and inclusion leads across the organization. And so the Power of Us can be adapted to work with, you know, in organizational settings, community settings, or members of the public that sign up for a course that might be, you know, happening. And what I am doing is embedding within that my therapeutic practice that involves systemic family constellations. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the approaches around constellation work is very much around looking at systems, understanding the, you know, the resources and the supports that our ancestors have left, you know, have given us. Also recognizing trauma as a gift, and what that means to us when we say a gift or suffering. What can we take from that? And really looking at systems, body work, as well as a lot of learning around well-being. Okay, so it's open to everybody. It's open to many different organizations. And what I've learned in the last 4 years is that although there are clear topics and the foundation to the Power of Us, that I can adapt it as well to work specifically with groups. Okay. So even the program evolves every time I deliver it to a different group of people, and it's wonderful. Yeah. So the program can be delivered online, or can be delivered face to face, and it's a safe space for us to share stories, share experiences, and learn together.
Beautiful, beautiful, and I love I read the brochure, the diversity in it, because there needs to be done a lot about that.
Yeah, we talk about intersectionality. So
yeah, exactly.
There is something so important around recognizing and connecting with that.
Yeah.
Because there's so many different intersections that will have an impact on how we see ourselves and how we see ourselves in the world and how we relate to others. So those intersections are really important, and that's one of the sessions, or one of the modules, is about intersectionality and mental health. So we talk about all of those topics through the program. So originally developed as a 6 session, that's been condensed into 4 sessions, and with some organizations I've even, you know, developed a whole day rather than having kind of separate sessions. We've done it across a whole day, or 2 half-day sessions online. So again, it's
flexible.
In the process of promoting the first Power of Us of 2024, so we can come together this year. And I'm looking at 2 online sessions, and that will be half-day sessions, and a full day in person in London as well.
Great, fantastic work you do. Where can people find you? And can I put a link to your brochure or whatever you do? And
yes,
where
please. So
they can.
You're more than welcome to share my brochure. People can find me on LinkedIn as Jessica Agudelo. And I also have a website, which is jessicaagudelo.com. Yeah. If you, again, my email address would be hello@jessicaagudelo.com. So yeah, different ways in which you can get in touch. If you're curious about what I do, if I'm more than happy to have a conversation as well and explain more of what I do. I also offer one-to-one mentoring using constellation work. So yeah, there's lots of different things that I do, and I'm very excited about the family, the systemic constellation work that I'm doing as well as part of that.
Yeah, sounds amazing. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. I think it's very important also for artists, for a lot of artists in the world right now. And yeah, I will put it in the show notes. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to see you again.
Yeah, lovely to see you. Next time, real life.
Yes, let's make that happen.
Dear listener, Art Talk is what I love to do. It is my brainchild, and it is the way I can have great conversations with artists, with art historians, and other great minds to support them, but also benefit them, as well as the listening artists. I also love to talk about things art history or review books I highly recommend reading. Making Art Talk takes a considerable amount of time. It takes research into the artists, art historians and others, and their work, asking questions that make an episode interesting to listen to, editing video, editing audio, scheduling, and sharing it on social media. If you enjoy Art Talk, then please consider supporting Art Talk on Patreon. The link is in the show notes. Your support is deeply appreciated and will be greatly rewarded. Thank you.